Jackie Kyger is a retired Chief Warrant Officer with the United States Coast Guard. He spent several years of the Coast Guard career stationed along the U.S.-Mexican border on the Texas Gulf Coast. His last assignment was as Commanding Officer of Coast Guard Station South Padre Island, Texas. He holds a doctorate in educational leadership and a Master of Fine Arts in creative writing. He is a professor at the University of Arizona's Global Campus, where he teaches graduate courses for the Department of Education and Liberal Arts. He is an author of the book, The Coast Guard on the Texas Border, which was published in August of 2021 with Historical Press, an imprint of the Arcadia Publishing that specializes in promoting local history. This evening, Jackie will be presenting about the local Coast Guard history, his motivation for writing the books, and future writing projects.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. I want to preface this with, I'm not a historian. I'm just a guy that likes history. And as I go through this presentation, my normal audience is people who are not affiliated with the Coast Guard. So all of this is brand new. If I say 1790 to this crowd, you're probably not going to flinch. But if I say it in the community, it draws in the attention of perhaps why that is. And so I say that because you're going to see some of that as I introduce what's going on in South Texas, and it's all connected there. So what drove this was writing a book, and my book is a simple little book, 128 pages, approximately 84 photographs that highlight the Coast Guard units, ships, and the people here in South Texas on the border. The Coast Guard has its roots in other departments within the government, in government's history, dating, gosh, all the way back to 1790, in the Revenue Cutter Service, whose objective it was, as far as also, collecting taxes, but in 1790, it was also to stop people bringing things in to the United States that were taxed, and then the smuggling of that. And that mission still holds true today, and especially holds true on our South Texas border. This fell under the Department of Treasury. The first Secretary of Treasury was Alexander Hamilton, and you probably know that guy from the play. The Coast Guard has a great history in search and rescue and has roots in the U.S. Life-Saving Service dating back to 1878 as a result. Now, today, the Coast Guard in South Texas will conduct more than 400 law enforcement boardings serving both the recreational boating and commercial fisheries community while assisting in search and rescue activities to the tune of $1.5 million in property saved or assisted and 95 persons saved or otherwise assisted. Being a rare unit whose southern boundary borders with Mexico, they've interdicted more than 90 launches, illegal boats operating in U.S. waters, more than 25 nautical miles of illegal fishing gear recovered. All of this in 2023. In 1915, the president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, signed the act to create the Coast Guard by merging that Revenue Cutter Service with the Life-Saving Service into today's U.S. Coast Guard. Then in 1933, the Steamboat Inspection Service was also absorbed by the Coast Guard. And that 1933 law is why the Coast Guard led the maritime investigation of the Queen Isabella Causeway Bridge collision collapse on September the 15th, 2001, 4 days after 9/11. And I cover that in my book. And then in 1939, the lighthouse, as well as all navigational systems, fell to the responsibility of the Coast Guard, which is why we had an aids to navigation team at Port Mansfield, Texas, and we currently have one on South Padre Island. So all these organizations make us what we are today. And in each of them, we find history here in South Texas. An example, on May the 13th in 1846, President James Polk signed a declaration of war against Mexico, and revenue cutters were put into service in the Gulf of Mexico. This fleet was a combination of sailing and steam-powered cutters. The steamers with considerably shallower drafts were of a particular benefit along the Texas Gulf Coast in its natural inlets, such as the Brazos-Santiago Pass, which is the southernmost pass in Texas. Relations between the two nations, Mexico and the United States, remained tense over the border. And in July of 1845, President Polk ordered troops into disputed lands that lay between the Nueces and the Rio Grande River, which is where I am. While the U.S. Life-Saving Service was created in 1878, it wasn't until 1881 that South Texas benefited from its impact formally. The superintendent of the Life-Saving Service was Mr. Sumner Kimball, who was tasked with leading the effort to establish approximately 280 life-saving stations along the U.S. eastern and Gulf Coast shores. Now in Texas, 4 of those 280 were built, one in Galveston, another in Pascavallo, another on Mustang Island, and the last here at Brazos-Santiago Pass in South Texas. The station at Brazos-Santiago was assigned life-saving station number 222. You only need drive through Port Isabel to see the towering magnitude of the Point Isabel Lighthouse, and it's been standing proudly in South Texas since 1852. It is a constant reminder of our history, and aids to navigation team South Padre Island is responsible for all the buoys, markers, and ranges from the south end of the Brownsville Ship Channel to the northern land cut just above Port Mansfield, Texas. Now, in the photo on the left, it's very likely a couple of 27-foot branch-type pulling surf boats from the mid to late 1800s. And on the right, we have 21st century fast response boats. And we also have the 41-footer multi-purpose boat, which is tells me I probably need to update my photograph because I think the UTBs have moved on to other things. But with that, the current inventory. So as well as the boats, the book covers, the cutters, and ships that serve here on the Texas border, starting with the buck and a quarters, remember those? The 125 active class cutter that was built in response to the ever increasing need to support prohibition in the early part of the 20th century. Congress passed the National Prohibition Act in October of 1919. The Coast Guard cutter Point Noel is featured on the book cover as well as in the book. It's an 82-foot patrol boat that has the distinction of only having one home port throughout its 30-year career, and that was here in South Texas. Now, the largest ship was the 210-foot Coast Guard cutter Durable, a medium endurance cutter that found its home, its moorings at the old oil dock moorings in the Brownsville Ship Channel. So while I'm showing boat pictures here, I want you to know that the book is chock full of ships and cutters, photos significant to South Texas. The hurricane of 1919. Now, I've included pages and pages of log entries from the Brazos-Santiago Life-Saving Station. Now, these logs are maintained by the National Archives and Records Administration, and Coast Guard Station South Padre Island, they gave me access to the copies that they had when I was doing my research. Now, these entries by the life-saving crew members kind of gives a glimpse into the day-to-day operations of being called into harm's way to assist ships and mariners along the coast of deep South Texas. Now, in the book, I haven't edited. I have presented them as they were written by the crew members as best as I could. And one of the entries was a rescue on September the 16th of 1919. That entry earned the crew the Silver Life-Saving Medal for rescuing the vessel Cape Horn in what was known as the Florida Keys hurricane of 1919. There are a few sections in the book where the recordings of the rescue notes, the recording logs are held by both the Life Saving Service and then later when they became the Coast Guard. I have entries of both. Now I mentioned that rescue unit of Cape Horn and the resulting silver life-saving medal to the crew earlier. Now, in the log entry, and you see on the screen there before you, the log entry at the bottom is an entry that was made by the crew members, and it's the entry that describes the event in which they ultimately earned the silver life-saving medals. I have to read it to you. September the 16th, 1919, assisted the schooner Cape Horn with a cargo of fish and ice. POB 8. Lives saved. That's the whole entry. That's the chalked it up probably as another day of being in the rescue business. And then later on, it came out the heroes that they were. I think it's important that we honor the people who served as much as we lift up the stations, boats, ships, and missions. Chief Pablo Valent was the first Hispanic American to be in charge to lead a rescue station, Coast Guard Station, Port Isabel, in 1935. But he was no stranger to the Brazos-Santiago Pass, as some 15 years earlier, he was part of the boat crew that received that silver life-saving medal for the rescue of the Cape Horn. Wallace L. Reed. That's the name of the street that the Coast Guard station is on. It's named after the longest serving station keeper and then officer in charge, Chief Warrant Officer Reed. My tour was 3 years. Chief Warrant Officer Reed served for nearly 3 decades in both the Life Saving Service and the U.S. Coast Guard. I did include, and I especially want to point this out because I know within the foundation of Coast Guard, for Coast Guard history, there's a dedicated section to oral history, and I think it's very important. And I included an interview with then 92-year-old World War II veteran and retired Coast Guard commander Charlie Wilson from San Benito, Texas, which is just up the road. That was a couple of years ago. I think Charlie's 95 now and doing great. The oral history that we captured here includes his story of enlisting when he was 17 years old during World War II, his boot camp experience, which I believe was in Baltimore, Maryland, and then also his memories and recollections of being stationed in South Texas as an engineman second class in the 1940s. The Coast Guard cutter Point Noel, commissioned in 1967, decommissioned 30 years later in 1997. As I said before, its only home port was South Padre Island. The gentleman you see in the photograph on the left is Master Chief Ambrose Adolph Paycheck. Master Chief Paycheck. He was the officer in charge of the Point Noel in 1967. Him and his crew that you see there on the right, from South Texas, they went to, I believe, Tacoma, Washington, and received the Point Noel, and he conned the ship as the OIC all the way down the west coast of the United States, through the Panama Canal, up the east side of Mexico, and across the Gulf of Mexico to its home port here in South Texas. Master Chief was around when the Noel was decommissioned, and we invited him to come to the decommissioning ceremony. At that time, some 30 years later, Master Chief received his plank owner certificate. So it was a good day to do the right thing by the Coast Guard for a wonderful Coast Guardsman. I want to point out this simple building. And this is important in that it's a radio beacon station. And locally down here on Highway 100, today it's just east of the parking lot of the local convenience store Stripes in Bayview. It intersects with 511 and Highway 100. Today, all you're going to see in the scrub brush are the remains of the concrete foundation footings. The Coast Guard, it was responsible for a radio beacon signal. And with that, the Coast Guard was responsible for manning and maintaining the Loran stations. Loran Station Port Isabel was established in 1967 and in service until 1979, when it was replaced. Loran A was replaced with Loran C, being broadcast from Coast Guard Station Loran, Raymondville, Texas, which is about an hour north of here. On February the 8th, 2010, the Coast Guard ended transmissions of all Loran C signals. As global positioning satellites, navigation technology, it just became available to everyone, and it surpassed the accuracy and the need for Loran stations. The Intercoastal Waterway. I just love this photograph. From the Brownsville Ship Channel to New Jersey, the Intercoastal Waterway runs the whole length. But down here in South Texas, beginning in 1945 and continued through the planned 150-mile dredging through the Laguna Madre Bay. Now, the Laguna Madre, it's a protected body of water between the mainland of Texas to its west and the barrier island of South Padre Island to its east. The average depth of the Laguna is considered to be 3 feet at mean tide. The ICW was dredged for a depth of 12 feet and a width of 125 feet for its 150-mile length through our area, including the mud flats that you see here that separated the lower and upper Laguna Madre. In June of 1949, the channel was completed and has been in operation ever since. Today, the Coast Guard Aids to Navigation team on South Padre Island maintains the southernmost end of the ICW, servicing more than 373 buoys and markers. Now, while the ICW was completed in 1949, the dredging in the Port Mansfield area continued. And in 1962, the final Port Mansfield channel was completed, cutting through the barrier island of Padre Island into the Gulf of Mexico. This man-made cut now separates North Padre Island from South Padre Island. It is commonly referred to as the East Cut. The SPI, the South Padre Island jetties, which are 28 miles south of there and just north of the border, was created to maintain the natural inlet that was known as the Brazo Santiago Pass. And due to time constraints here, and plus I don't want to give everything away that's in the book, I invite you to check out and learn more about the Coast Guard Reserves in South Texas, the Coast Guard Auxiliary, the many other Coast Guard units and missions in the way of continuing with aids and navigation, not only as a result of the jetties, but the construction and creation of the 17-mile Brownsville Ship Channel, and then the completion, as I mentioned, the Intercoastal Waterway. But before I wrap up, I would be remiss if I did not mention the collapse of the Queen Isabella Causeway. My accounting, I was there, but my accounting is based on a released Coast Guard maritime investigation where in the early morning hours of September the 15th of 2001, 4 days after 9/11, think about that for a second. 4 days after 9/11, the 2.5-mile bridge in your community collapses. A tugboat with barges struck the bridge, causing two 85-foot sections of the causeway to collapse into the water. 5 cars went over the edge before traffic could be stopped. 8 people lost their lives, and there were 3 survivors. In 2003, the bridge was renamed the Queen Isabella Memorial Bridge to honor those lives lost. And in the photograph, you'll see that's the Coast Guard cutter Mallet, who was home ported in Corpus Christi, but they were already underway, and they were working and had pushed in for the night at Port Mansfield, Texas. And so they were able to get on site, not immediately because it is a construction tender, but much, much quicker than had they been all the way up to Corpus Christi and begin the recovery operations and things of that nature. So the future. I really feel we have to know our history if we're going to manage our future. So the future, in the 1940s, there was a crew of 14 Coast Guards. In the 80s, a crew of 31. And in recent modern times, more than 65 men and women are serving and operating out of Station South Padre Island. So that's me, and that's my 20-minute spiel on the history and happenings of the Coast Guard along the Texas border. And with that, there's my contact information. And I would like to hopefully move this discussion to answering any questions you all might have. And then really, I would like to encourage you to consider, I think everyone has a story. And I would encourage you to consider maybe telling your story. And if you have a deep and rich Coast Guard affiliation, maybe telling it through that lens. I'm Jackie Kyger. Thank you for having me. And thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate that a great deal. A couple quick comments before I open up questions to everyone else. First of all, I think, Jackie mentioned himself not being a historian, but I think one of the important things about his book is that it is bibliography and it is cited. So from a historical perspective, if I want to go back and research some of the details, it's still there. Oftentimes storytellers forget that important part of referencing their research. So I'm glad to see that you did that. As everyone else knows, I am a Loranimal, so I'm happy to have seen the Loran community represented in there. There was another station also in Galveston, Texas at the same time. And I had command of the Coast Guard cutter Padre, so my namesake is the North Island of Padre. And so appreciate that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and open up the questions to everyone. You should be allowed to unmute yourself. And as in the past, if we can do this in a neat and orderly fashion, let's go ahead and have some questions for Jackie.
Okay, like Gary, Gary knows I never can go without statement before question, but yeah, the struggles along the southern border as far as the Coast Guard is concerned continue today. I just read an article just a few hours ago from Forbes magazine about the supplemental budget that's going on in the Customs and Border Protection are looking at multi-billion-dollar supplementals, nothing for the Coast Guard. So we continue to have that kind of image problem. That's more me expressing my frustration than anything else. The other thing is that I kind of serve as the informal reviewer for the Foundation for Coast Guard History, book reviewer for the Foundation for Coast Guard History. So I don't have your book. I will be getting it. And hopefully get a review in a future newsletter. So the Intracoastal Waterway, that was a fascinating piece I knew nothing about. I mean, I know that the Intracoastal Waterway was expanded grandly along the East Coast and the Gulf Gulf Coast during the war years, then continuing. But that was a fascinating piece. I don't have a question, but thanks for sharing. Just like Gary was talking about the little animals. So thank you.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. Hey, Gary, I'm just curious if our participants, I'm seeing everybody is on mute. Do we know if they can on their own unmute, or do they have to raise their hand to be unmuted?
They should be able to unmute themselves.
Okay.
Tina, can you unmute yourself real quick just as a test?
I can.
Okay, we're good to go.
Yeah, and I see TJ Riker. He just unmuted also. So, anyways, I wanted to make sure we didn't have a technical issue. And Captain Dish, I appreciate your comment about the ICW. I spent a lot of time working the ditch, especially in aids to navigation, especially on the construction timber, and it was good times.
Well, I have a question, Dr. Kyger. This is Tim
Yes,
Riker. Well, first of all, the only mission of the Coast Guard that I didn't hear you cover down there was ice operations. So I guess your ice operations are not big in South Texas. Would that be correct?
That's absolutely spot on. Yes, sir.
Well, what I was noticing throughout your presentation is that your photographs, they're all attributed, or most of them are attributed to what looks like South Padre Island collection. So is that a collection at the station, or who's got the collection?
It's photographs. It's in a photo album.
Mhm.
And I appreciate you saying that, because I went back to the station, years later, and said, "Hey, I'm going to try and do this. Can I look through the unit photograph logs?" And they were very accommodating. I certainly, Semper Paratus was evident with those folks in helping me. But a lot of it was when I was the CO, Master Chief Paycheck, I mentioned him. His wife was from South Texas, and I could have run into her without her telling me a story about something that had to do, and she took me over to the museum, and this lovely, gingerly older lady showing me the museum. There's a photograph. She says, "See that little girl? That's me. I'm 5 years old. I'm in the first school in Port Isabel." And so I got a lot of stories just by hosting good Coast Guard Day picnics.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to slam anybody, but I miss those good Coast Guard Day picnics and being invited to them, and just the camaraderie of. There's this other layer that I feel that takes place is the retired community.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of carry on silently and unsung, but if I could make a pretty good list of all the retired folks that live down here, and with that we get stories as a result, and that's really what motivated me when I was the CO of the station. I started putting pictures up on the wall, and then next thing you know, we're like, let's kind of do this chronologically, and so I had all that in a PowerPoint when I retired. And so then from that, I went back to the station and kind of, got what else I needed from those folks. And to, Gary's point, Commander Thomas's point, as an academia, I did my very best to say, okay, this is why I know what I know. This is my source. And even having said that, I could have done a better job in it. I didn't necessarily follow APA format or Chicago style format. But I did want it clear to the reader. I'm not making it up. This is where I got it from.
Mm-hmm. Does the station have a lot of primary historical materials in writing? I'm talking about logs and notations and that sort of stuff.
I just had copies because, like any other Coast Guard station, I think we'd keep them for 3 years and then we'd ship them off to the archives, never to be seen again.
Never be seen again, right? All right. Well, it's very interesting, and those photos, every one of those photos was a good, interesting representation of a mission of the Coast Guard down in South Texas. So I could see where the folks in South Texas could easily connect with that. I mean, I can connect with it, and I'm up here in Ohio. I mean,
and I absolutely appreciate that. And the publisher, Arcadia Publishing, they're a local history publisher. They want it, and they want to drive that story with photographs. And when I reached out to them about publishing this, they said, "Well, will you fill out our proposal?" They sent me a template of everything I was supposed to do, They asked, it went on for about 6 or 7 pages. And one of them, I had to give them photograph samples so that they knew that I knew how to manage them and copy them and get them, keep them in that quality form to get them to that. But that was part of the deal, was you have to have a certain amount of photographs to get considered for what I was doing. Now, there are other things in which they do that they don't require that. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to do it. And I'm just so happy that, if nothing else, what I know now is in one place. It's in a book. So if people want to see it, hopefully we won't lose it. Hopefully it'll go, accounted for.
How did you come in contact with them? I mean,
I got mad.
Okay.
I saw a book in the bookstore that said the images of Port Isabel, Texas. Oh. And I thought, wow, I was stationed at Coast Guard Station, Port Isabel, Texas. Let me just thumb through this bad boy. And I thumbed through it, and I didn't see anything about the Coast Guard. So I showed them, I bought the book and brought it home, and I went through it page by page. There's nothing about the Coast Guard. And so I said, okay, let me take the high road. Based on what the publisher information, I just Googled around until I found an email address, and I emailed them and told them what a wonderful book they had created about Port Isabel. Would they be interested in knowing more about South Texas, and specifically the Coast Guard in South Texas? And that's what did it. And this is the interesting thing, if what I've learned, and maybe I said this before, if you write nonfiction, it's easier to get it published than fiction, simply because you don't necessarily have to have it written down. You have a proposal. And in fiction, you have to have your draft. So whatever you think your story is, whatever you think works, you have to pitch that to publishing companies. But in nonfiction, which is what this is, a historical narration, I told them, I said, look, I got probably 100 photographs that I know are of good quality, and this is my plan. And I went through their proposal, and then they accepted it.
To your knowledge, are there any other Coast Guardsmen who've been involved with this publisher?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Are there any other Coast Guard authors that have been involved with this publisher that you know of, or are you the only one?
Was it Captain Deese that spoke last time? So whoever spoke last time, they published with this same publisher. I can't remember who it was, Commander Thomas.
Yeah. Okay.
But,
so Admiral, actually, I've helped with using them before on the Cape May one. One of the really good things about them as a publisher is that they want photographs. Mm-hmm. Many publishers you get involved with, they're like, oh no, photographs, that's expensive. Are they really, that's their whole scheme. And you see them on the bookshelf, all those books have a lot of photographs because they know that draws people in. So there are a number of people involved with the Coast Guard who have worked on localized history with Arcadia.
Maybe I missed it. Where are they out of?
The Carolinas.
The Carolinas?
Yeah, I don't remember which one, but the Carolinas. Let me look at my book.
I was going to say on the internet, because that's how I deal with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's only 2 Carolinas, so it'd be easier.
But physically, I think it was. But my representative was out of Dallas. So.
Oh, all right. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
As far as I know, I mean, all of their books are picture style books. I got several different locations, always obviously focused on the Coast Guard. We had a first class boatswain and his wife when I was at the Door County Maritime Museum, who published on the Coast Guard, basically the history of the life-saving stations and the lighthouses on the Door Peninsula. So I got one in my hand here. I'm looking at their main offices are Charleston, South Carolina, Chicago, Illinois, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and San Francisco, California. So, nice. And they are picture book focused. They are photographic focus books with poignant text. That's how I would describe it. They want good historic text to accompany the books, but they're not looking for a tome. They're looking for pretty concentrated stuff. I'm fascinated with I never really thought. I mean, I hadn't thought of it since the BM1 back in the day that published a book about Indoor County, about how much of an opportunity that was for local museums and then Coast Guard stations, who a lot of times have photographs nobody else has, to get them out there. But it's more local appeal. That's the big thing. It's very local appeal.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the bookstore at the Maritime Museum I managed sold a heck of a lot of those books because people would come in and get interested in the lighthouses and the life-saving stations, and that this is a pretty easy read, and would do it. So yeah, good job. I have to pursue that more. So,
I've got one last question here. Educate me, Doctor, to how you Texans refer to your geography, because you were referring to South Texas. So what's the definition of South Texas? Is it everything along the water? Is there a North Texas along the water? Is it up in the Panhandle? How do Texans define South Texas?
Well, it's going to depend on who you talk to.
Okay.
So we're in the Rio Grande Valley.
Okay.
And so being in the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley, we know we're in South Texas. And I guess people in Corpus Christi up in Nueces County, which is, you got to drive through King Ranch, which is the largest ranch in the United States. It takes you an hour to drive across it. And those those Yankees up in Corpus, they think that they're also in South Texas. So it depends on who you talk to. And,
all right.
And don't get me started about them people in San Antonio thinking they're from South Texas.
Okay.
To follow up on that, one of the things that Jackie and I are talking, we found out we overlapped a tour when I was with the Customs Service, and I was out of Houston, and Houston is Gulf Coast, and I would say as Port Aransas going east towards Louisiana is Gulf Coast, not South Texas.
Oh, okay.
And then you get into East Texas, and as Jackie says, Texas, they remind you of two things. One is that they used to be a nation before they became a state,
right,
and that if you're not from there, you don't know what they're talking about. So,
okay, I'll keep that in mind. So, a very good presentation. I enjoyed it.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for your kind words. It's important to me to tell the story.
I'll get your book too. So.
Oh, hey, you know what? Let me talk about that for a second. I appreciate you saying you're going to get my book.
Mm-hmm.
What I do, I can only tell you what I do. Having been through this a little bit, I will never buy a book from Amazon if I can buy it from the author, because there's no money in it for the author at Amazon. Oh. So keep that in mind. And so what you'll see, and I do this too, I encourage people, hey, would you like a signed copy? Because you're not going to get a signed copy through Amazon. Oh, hey, would you like a signed copy? Go to my website, and it's set up so that I can, buy and sell books there. And that, not that we're ever going to get rich on any of this, but there is much, did I say much more of a profit margin if you buy directly from the author, especially if it's, no one famous like myself. If it's Stephen King, you can probably buy it however you want to buy it.
Yeah, well, I'm not interested in Stephen King. I'm interested in this guy. Okay. All right. So if I go to Jackie Kyger,
JackieKyger.com, you'll find me.
All right. Okay, that's a good piece of advice right there.
Yeah, and that's my author website, and I've got some other projects I'm working on. I'm going to do the same thing on Cameron County as far as the history of Cameron County. I'm working on that right now. I want to do. I'm going to start doing a novel. I've been outlining a novel. What I want to talk about is the smuggling that's going on down here through the launches. Playa Baghdad is a beach about 12 miles south of here in Mexico, and then I want to look at it from the human dynamic. So all that kind of stuff you'll see on my website if I have my website up to date, which 90% do. And mostly, I'm just having fun telling stories. I'm a bosun mate. Bosun mates are good at telling stories.
True. That's true. All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Hey, I would be remiss if I did not say hi to Master Chief James Caldwell. I was a BM1. I was his XPO he's waving at us right there. I was a BM1 on a .0L when he was the officer in charge. I believe he retired out of that position. And that little 82-footer won the National Marine Fisheries Award for doing more fisheries enforcement in the entire 8th District than any other unit. So bravo Zulu, Master Chief. And when I went before my officer in charge board to get my officer in charge certification, Master Chief made sure I knew what I was doing. And I got all 4 of my command certifications in one sitting because of Master Chief. So thank you, Master Chief. I appreciate you, buddy.
Jackie, I'm sorry I missed the first part of your presentation, but your website has a cool little video introduction and video overview of your book, which is really cool. So are you doing all of your promotion, self-promotion, or does Arcadia help you with some of that?
Well, thank you, Tina, for saying that, because when I filled out the form for Arcadia Publishing to be considered, one of the questions was, do you have an author website? And I checked no. And then they said, are you willing to have an author website? And I'm like, I checked yes. They didn't help me do any of that. But I thought, well, I need to have an author website. And so I put that together. And then they came back and they asked me, hey, do you have any media pieces? And I'm like, yeah, give me a second. So yeah, I made through Screencast-O-Matic, I don't know, something. I made it through one of those media tools. I work in education. I work in an online setting. So the expectation is that I should probably know my way around some of these tools. And so that kind of did work in my favor. But yeah, I did make all of those, and I intend to make more for as my other books come out.
That looks great. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
This is another, I holding the book up. It's like another one of Arcadia's books that was published. I talked about the stations and life-saving stations of Door County. This baby was published in 2005. 18 years later, it's still selling lots and lots of copies in the museum store at the Door County Maritime Museum. So even though it's like you said, a picture book with some focused history, sometimes they have staying power. So I'm hoping like 18 years from now, your book is still selling.
And I haven't figured this out, but a Coast Guard friend of mine published with them on Hurricane Katrina. Oh, I should have that book in the ready. I have it here somewhere. Captain Mueller, and he was explaining to me that at some point you can negotiate back with them, and then you can buy the rights of your book back at a very small fee, and then you can kind of keep it away, keep it alive that way also. And I fully intend to do that, which kind of brings up another point. Now that I've learned my way around, I am going to write a historical book, same format, about Cameron County, all the historical things about it. There's over 150 national markers in Cameron County. And so I'm looking at now, well, do I go through a publishing company, or do I go through Amazon and self-publish in their, what they call is it KPD or something like that they call it? I'm exploring that now to see that as an option, and I might do that because it's some, you spend part of your career on white halls, you spend part of your career on black halls, and you spend part of your writing career with a publisher, and you spend part of your career on your own. So I'm kind of I'm kicking that around, mostly just for the experience to see how that worked for me, because you just never know which way it's going to go.
Tina, any insight?
Right, me? So I frequently use an ISBN code for some of my clients because they want to potentially publish their own books, as just a way to kind of put up either on Blurb or to allow friends and families to purchase them, so they don't have to buy 20 copies and hand them out to friends and families, so the individuals can buy their own. It's kind of this contemplation of do you go through a traditional publisher, but you're still self-promoting, you're still doing all the work anyway, so why not just do kind of your own self-publishing? So Kindle, I think it's the Amazon, the KDP. I've been looking at that a little bit myself too, as an option, but Blurb is kind of another thing that I've used in the past. So
well, and that's good to know. And it's the value with Arcadia is you learn a lot and you get a lot of support. They gave me a copy editor. I like to think I know what I'm doing, but they gave me a copy editor, and I was surprised I didn't know what I was doing, And they're like, okay, this and this and this. They gave me a format. I stuck to the format on my first draft, and then they came back and they said, well, we got some questions. A lot of it too was their lack of knowledge, the editor of nautical terms and things of that nature. So we had to clear the air on that. But I also got a marketing person. They said, how far are you willing to travel to events? And so I said, well, I guess I could go up to San Antonio, 4-hour drive. And so I went to San Antonio. They booked me up there, and they booked me at Barnes and Noble. And so I wouldn't have been able to, I wouldn't even have a clue how I do that.
Yeah. I think the editor is invaluable if you're somebody like me who misses the occasional spelling and commas and things like that. I prefer design and layout, so I want to do the design and layout, and I don't want somebody else telling me how to do that. So that's a balance too, to find somebody that would work.
I was reading Ken Follett's book. He's a millionaire as an author. He's a historical fiction millionaire. About page 200, there's a typo. Typos happen, it happens to everybody. And so even when you put your best foot forward, it's like, I can't believe I did. There's things in this book. I'm like, well, if I do a second edition, I'm going to fix that, but no one's called me out on it yet. So I'm like, I'm going to leave it alone.
Everyone's a terrible proofreader of their own stuff, and I'm the worst.
I'm the same way. I do a lot of that in my day job with students in APA format, which is not the format right in this, but I do that a lot. And so it can, when you get into your own stuff, and you shouldn't. I mean, especially if you're trying to tell a story, just tell the story. That's what the first draft is not a first draft if it's not written down. So as ugly as it looks, get it written down. And then you can go back and edit it, or you can ask a beta reader to look at. My wife is a beta reader, and she loves telling me what's wrong with things I'm doing. So it works. It's a win-win for all of us.
All right, we're coming up close to our hour. Does anybody have any other questions? All right. Well, Jackie, I want to thank you. There's a competition between the Gulf Coast and the Great Lakes as to who's the forgotten coast when it comes to Coast Guard history. And having, like I said, having served along the Gulf Coast, I realized that there's a great deal to be talked about that most people don't even understand. I mean, the port of Houston is during the Gulf War was the second largest onload port for getting stuff to the Middle East. And as we see things happening right now, you start realizing how important that Gulf Coast becomes. And I became aware of that because I was intimately involved working with those operations. So there, again, it's the Coast Guard, little known facts and history that have critical aspects of our Coast Guard history. And that, that's just a small one. Corpus Christi has got a large naval air station training center that's right there on the water, that every once in a while the Coast Guard has to go pick up a naval aviator cadet out of the water when he's ejected from his plane, and just things like that all over the place. So I appreciate you taking your time this evening for sharing not only that history, but also talking about of getting the book done. Publishing a book is not for the faint of heart. And you gave us some encouragement that it can be done and that we should be doing it. And for that, I appreciate that. So with that, Admiral, do you have anything to close?
Nothing except to, again, express my appreciation for the doctors coming on board tonight and participating in evening reports. It's quite a report.
Good. Thank you all for letting me tell my story. If there's anything I can do for the Foundation for Coast Guard History, just let me know.
Now lay before the mast all evening reports. Evening reports will be held online. Aloha and good evening, supporters of Coast Guard history, and welcome to this evening's edition of the Foundation for Coast Guard History's Evening Reports. For those who have not been to sea aboard a Coast Guard cutter, after sundown, evening reports are held by the executive officer to update them on the day's accomplishments. Armed with that knowledge, they can align those accomplishments to the next day's activities. In much the same way, we hope that looking at the Coast Guard's past can be used as a guide to the future. Or as Captain Fred Hersberg, our founder, says, reflect on the past to illuminate the future. The Foundation for Coast Guard History is a nonprofit organization whose purpose is to recognize the prestige of the Coast Guard and highlighting its past contributions to the nation and advancing public knowledge of the Coast Guard and its predecessor services. We are recording this event this evening. If you have any concerns regarding that, please drop off now. You can review the recording at your leisure once it's posted. It will be posted online on our YouTube channel. I will have everyone on mute for the duration of the presentation. If you have a question, please use the chat box. With that, it's time to introduce our speaker this evening.